This podcast is brought to you by the National Animal Nutrition Program, sponsored by USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service. Welcome to this educational series on the principles of animal nutrition. In this episode, we will provide an introduction to basic nutrition terminology and a discussion of fundamental nutrients in the nutrition of food-producing animals. I'm Avery, and I'm here with my colleague, Zaya.
Great to be here, Avery. It really is important for producers to understand that nutrition directly impacts animal health, their productivity, whether that's milk or meat, and of course, the bottom line. Feed is often the biggest cost.
It really is. You can't manage what you don't measure. So the best place to start is with a system called proximate analysis. It sounds complicated, but it's really just a way to separate feed into its basic parts.
Okay, so where do we begin with that analysis?
The very first thing we look at is water content. We take a sample, dry it out completely, and what's left is called the dry matter, or DM.
Right, so it's everything but the water. Why is that the first step?
Well, because water content can vary hugely between feeds. Think about a dry hay versus a wet silage. You can't compare their nutritional value as is. By looking at everything on a dry matter basis, we get a level playing field. It lets us compare the actual nutrients in a pound of hay versus a pound of silage.
That makes perfect sense. An apples-to-apples comparison. So once we have the dry matter, what's next?
Next up is a big one, crude protein, or CP. This is basically an estimate of the total protein in the feed. And protein, as we know, is absolutely vital for muscle growth, milk production, just about everything.
And how is that measured? They don't count protein molecules, right?
No, not quite. It's actually a bit of a chemistry shortcut. All protein contains nitrogen, so the lab measures the total nitrogen in the sample and then multiplies it by 6.25 to estimate the crude protein. It's an estimate, but it's a very, very useful one.
Okay, so we have dry matter and crude protein. What about the rest of the feed? I'm guessing fiber is a huge component, especially for ruminants.
Absolutely critical. And you're right, fiber is a bit more complex. The old crude fiber measure isn't used much anymore because it wasn't very accurate. Now we split it into two key measurements, NDF and ADF.
NDF and ADF. Let's start with NDF. What does that stand for?
NDF is neutral detergent fiber. The easiest way to think about NDF is as the total fiber. It's all the structural parts of the plant cell wall, the cellulose, hemicellulose, and lignin. It's the bulky part of the feed.
So this is what fills the animal up? The gut fill factor we hear about?
That's the perfect way to put it. The higher the NDF, the more space it takes up in the rumen and the quicker the animal feels full. A very high NDF can actually limit how much an animal is physically able to eat in a day, which in turn limits their energy and nutrient intake.
Okay, that makes sense. So if NDF is the total fiber, what is ADF?
ADF stands for acid detergent fiber. This measures the least digestible parts of that plant wall, specifically the cellulose and the lignin. Lignin is essentially indigestible. It's like the wood in the plant. So a higher ADF value generally means the feed is less digestible and has lower energy.
Just to recap, NDF is about how much they can eat, and ADF is about how much energy they can get out of what they eat.
You've got it. It's a great shorthand. And just to round out the proximate analysis, there are two other components. Ether extract, which is basically a measure of the fat or lipid content. That's a dense source of energy. And then there's ash, which is what's left after you burn the sample. It represents the mineral content, calcium, phosphorus, and so on.
Okay, so that's the theory. How does this look in the real world? We've got a couple of example lab reports here to look at. Let's call them Report 1 and Report 2.
Yeah, let's put it into practice. What do the numbers say?
All right, let's start with the first thing you mentioned, dry matter. Report 1 shows a dry matter of 81%. Report 2 shows a dry matter of 89.3%. So, what does that difference tell a producer?
It tells us that the ration in Report 1 has more water. For every 100 pounds of that diet you put out, only 81 pounds is actual feed, while 19 pounds is water. The ration in Report 2 is a bit drier, with only about 11 pounds of water per 100. It's important for storage and for knowing what you're actually paying for.
Good point. Okay, what about crude protein? Report 1 is sitting at 12.5% CP, and Report 2 is at 10.5%. That seems like a significant difference.
It is. All else being equal, the feed from Report 1 offers quite a bit more protein. If you have a group of animals with high protein requirements, like fast-growing calves or lactating cows, that 2% difference is huge. You'd get more performance from the first feed, or you'd need to add a protein supplement to the second one to get the same result.
Right, which costs money. Now for the tricky one, the fiber. Let's see. Report 1 has an ADF of 17.7% and an NDF of 33.8%. And Report 2 has an ADF of 17.3%, so a little lower, but its NDF is 37.4%, which is higher. What do you make of that, Avery?
That's a really interesting comparison. So the indigestible portion, the ADF, is very similar, almost a wash, but the feed in Report 2 has a higher total fiber, or NDF. This means it's bulkier, so even though its digestibility might be similar, the cows might not be able to eat as much of it. Their intake could be limited by that higher NDF.
So you could have a situation where a feed looks good on one number, but another number tells a different part of the story. You really need to look at them together.
You absolutely do. It's a puzzle, and each number is a piece. You can't see the whole picture without all of them.
Speaking of the whole picture, Avery, we shouldn't forget about fat and minerals. How do our two sample reports stack up there? Let's also touch on those summary energy values like TDN. What can they tell us?
Excellent question, Zia. Let's look at the crude fat first. Report 1 shows a fat content of 4.76%, while Report 2 is at 2.89%. Fat is incredibly energy dense, packing more than 2 times the energy of carbohydrates. So that higher fat content gives Report 1 another edge in providing energy.
And what about minerals?
That's where ash comes in, which represents the total mineral content. Report 1 is higher at 7.48% compared to 5.72% in Report 2. While minerals are absolutely vital for things like bone growth and metabolic function, the ash value is a bulk number. It tells us the total quantity of minerals, but not the specifics. For that, a producer would need to look at the detailed analysis of individual minerals like calcium and phosphorus.
That's a great point about the minerals being a bulk number. So with all these different factors, protein, fat, fiber digestibility, how does a producer get a single bottom line number for the total energy in the feed?
Exactly. That's where a summary index like TDN or total digestible nutrients comes in. It's designed to give you that bottom line. And when we look, it's fascinating. Report 1 has a TDN of 72.2%, and Report 2 is right there with it at 71.7%.
That's a fantastic summary. It really shows that while one feed might have more protein and the other is less bulky, it's the total digestible nutrients, the TDN, that gives us the big picture on energy. You have to look at all the numbers together to see the full story.
Yep, it's about knowing what you're working with. Testing your feed is a direct investment in the health of your animals and the profitability of your operation.
And understanding these values, dry matter, crude protein, ADF, NDF, and energy, gives you tremendous power to make smart management decisions. It lets you know if your herd is getting what they need, where you might need to supplement, and how you can get the most out of every dollar you spend on feed. Thanks so much for breaking it all down, Avery.
It has been great diving into this topic with you, Zia. Thank you for joining us on this episode, and we look forward to the next.
This podcast was generated by Wondercraft and moderated by NANP.